What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Monday, February 12th, 2018. And I'm going to start off by apologizing. I'm absolutely exhausted. I had a terrible weekend. And so I'm not going to be at my best today like I would normally like to be. And here's the story. Basically what it is, as you know, some months ago, our car was stolen. And fortunately, we got it back with only minimal damage, the ignition lock and so forth. Sunday morning, I'm ready to take Claire to church. And so I'm walking on out with armloads of MIDI gear and a laptop and sheet music and all the rest of it. And our parking space is empty. And our car got stolen again. And that was upsetting, a very upsetting situation. And then about 2:30, 3 o'clock this morning, we get a call from the police. They'd found it. It had been dumped in the local Walmart parking lot. Unfortunately, this time the car's been stripped. So it's not drivable, and we don't know that it's simply not worth repairing at this particular point. And they emptied it out of all kinds of things, except Claire's sheet music. She was very happy about that. Now, interestingly enough, the officer who was there when we recovered the car actually knew who I was from the radio show. He apparently listens to this radio show. But what was really interesting was the officer who came out to take the original report told me that as more and more of the illegal immigrants have poured onto this island, crime has gone through the roof. And right now they're dealing with 50, that's 50 stolen cars every single day. And the problem is that in addition to Title VIII, the state of Hawaii has got very strict laws about hiring undocumented workers. And so they come on out here to Hawaii and they turn to crime. Or maybe there were already criminals in their home countries and they came here to just do more of what they're doing. But the upshot of it is that as a result, car thievery, burglary, all that stuff has gone right through the roof here. So I have a message to George W. Bush, who the other day came on out and said that we should embrace the immigrants because they'll do the jobs that Americans won't. And I guess that's true, because most Americans I know don't steal cars. So Bush is actually right. Yeah, these illegal immigrants are doing the jobs we Americans won't do. They'll steal cars, they'll break into homes, they'll do all of that stuff here. And I have a message not only for George Bush, who thinks this is okay, but for people like Nancy Pelosi, who welcome the illegal immigrants into our country as long as they vote Democratic. And that is, you all owe me a car. In fact, you owe a car to everybody who's had a car stolen by the illegal immigrants or had their homes broken into by the illegal immigrants, because that's what we're paying for your political ideologies. And so as of right now, you're my enemy. You're of no benefit whatsoever to the American people right now when you bring in these illegal immigrants who are criminals and you do nothing about their being criminals, just so you can get reelected and have votes. And I'm very, very angry about this right now. So I didn't get any sleep since yesterday morning, and I'm a little fuzzy, and we're just going to deal with it. All right, the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phones when you call on in. Interestingly enough, as you know, the Olympics are underway over there in Korea. And I predicted this was going to happen. When Russia was kicked on out of the Olympics, I said, nobody's going to bother tuning on in. It's just not going to be all that interesting. It's going to be the USA, we're the greatest show. And yes, some of the Russian Olympics are competing under the Olympic flag. But the reality is that the ratings for the Olympics have just gone through the floor. NBC is going to take a bath on this. They paid a huge amount of money for the rights to broadcast the Olympics, and nobody's tuning on in. And I think part of it is the politicalization of the Olympics has left sports fans, athletic fans, just feeling cynical about it all. It's no longer about the athletes. It's about the politics. And people don't want to tune into a show and see more politics because they're getting politics up the yin-yang here. Now, there are some bright moments about it. That those North Korean cheerleaders are stealing the show. and they're just doing a wonderful job. And the article I was looking at about how great they are had to include the thing, if they do anything wrong, they're going to go to prison because North Korea is a dictatorship. And that illustrates what I mean. They're trying to still politicize the Olympics for whatever gain they can get out of it. Why not just say, the North Korean cheerleaders are beautiful, they're perfectly in synchronization, they're stealing the show, and end it there. But no, we have to put in a comment about if they do anything wrong, they're going to go to prison because they come from a dictatorship. Apparently, Donald Trump Jr.'s wife received a package with a white powder, unknown, and she was taken to the hospital, precautionary, and as it turned out, the powder was inert. But again, it shows that our civilization has become very uncivil when people do things like that. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, meanwhile, the Uranium One scandal is continuing to unfold, and this FBI informant, Douglas Campbell, is out there naming names and basically saying that this Uranium One scandal involves the whole Obama administration, up to and including Obama himself. Everybody was dipping their hands into this cash flow that was coming from Russia to grease the wheels, as it were, for Rosatom to get their hands on 20% of America's uranium ore, which, by the way, our country really can't afford to lose. So this is not going away anytime soon. Interesting article out of mgreatness.com, and they're saying essentially the same thing that I am. This is the new Watergate scandal. And they're commenting on how when the Nunes memo became public, the corporate media was already out there saying it's nothing, there's nothing here, don't pay attention. But the article is saying you could replace the names Comey, Strzok, and McCabe with Haldeman, Ehrlichman, and Mitchell. It's the same story all over again. Now, as you know, former CIA Director John Brennan has been hired by NBC and MSNBC, and they made the announcement. And apparently he is being hired as the attack dog against all the revelations about the Department of Justice and the FBI swamp. So corporate media is lining up their own little KGB to go on the attack against anybody who's trying to get this scandal out there. So obviously NBC and MSNBC are the bad guys. They want to cover this up. They want to make it go away. They don't want the Democrats to have to live with the stigma of a new Watergate. You know, because that's something that we hold over the Republicans' head, don't you know? So Brennan was hired basically to try and find a way to destroy Devin Nunes. And the corporate media is still up to their old tricks of trying to hide from you, the American people, what your government has been doing when you weren't looking. Now, getting on over to the war zones, emphasis on the plural, Syria and Russia are continuing to complain about the United States' illegal occupation of Syria territory. An occupation that has no United Nations authorization and is a complete and total violation of international law, along with, of course, Israel's continuing and now escalating attacks on Syria. Remember, there's no congressional declaration of war against Syria. It's just the military going on and saying, we're going to go wherever we feel like going, and you can't stop us. So Washington's continued support for a war against the legitimate government of Syria and support for Israeli and terrorist attacks on Syrian and Russian forces are undermining Russia's efforts to bring peace to the region, which obviously the United States does not want. They don't want peace. They want Syria in turmoil until Bashar al-Assad is driven from power. Meanwhile, the corporate media is trying to make it look like somehow this is all Russia's fault. Oh, it's all Russia's fault. Russia should just go home and let us take over this country. Don't know what's wrong with those gosh darn Ruskies. They don't understand the rules that we just made up here. Apparently, Kurdish fighters have destroyed the main position of the Turkish army, along with their tanks in northern Syria. This is a major setback for Turkey. And then supposedly, by mistake, U.S. airstrikes have killed 300 Kurdish fighters in eastern Syria. It looks like everybody's kind of changing sides back and forth. Nobody knows who's allied with who. And article coming out of the Express in Great Britain, Turkey could join forces with Assad's Syria regime in a snub to the United States. We're almost getting into 1984 here, where East Asia has always been our ally. We've always been at war with Oceania. Just goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Now, as you know, Israel has really cranked up on Syria, claiming, but not proving, that they had detected an Iranian drone crossing their border. Israel went on in and bombed targets in central Syria, and on their way back out, one of their F-16s got shot down. Actually, two of their aircraft got damaged. One of them crashed and the pilot ejected. At which point, Israel got all huffy and said, "How dare you shoot down our planes when we're dropping bombs on you? You're not allowed to do that, you anti-Semitic Jew haters," and promptly carried out attacks against 15 targets inside Syria. And Netanyahu's out there talking tough. Of course, right now, he needs a distraction. He needs a major distraction while he deals with this issue of possible corruption charges. And nothing is going to distract the media more than a big, bloody war on somebody else. So Israel has now deployed an anti-missile system on the Syria border so that they can fly on into Syria, blow something up, and get back out without being shot down. They hope. And Netanyahu is out there talking tough. He was on TV the other day. He's basically warning that Iran has no right to be in Syria. Well, actually, they do. Syria has asked them to come on in. Syria has asked for their help, just as they have for Russia. And Israel doesn't have anything to say about it. But Netanyahu is out there saying Iran's presence in Syria, that's a terrible thing. He's out there talking about inflicting the heavy blow to Iranian and Syrian forces. And yes, it was a major attack. And this represents a major escalation because Iran likes to avoid direct conflict, and Israel prefers to operate covertly in the shadows. They don't want to be seen doing what it is that they do. But with this weekend's attacks, that has all now changed, and it's open warfare. Meanwhile, with regard to Netanyahu and his corruption problems, the Israeli Attorney General is asking the police to delay their recommendations on whether or not to indict Netanyahu for corruption. And apparently the police the police are saying maybe, maybe not. We haven't decided yet. Let's take a phone call. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hey, Mike. Hey, isn't Netanyahu's second in command Lieberman, right? He's worse than Netanyahu, I believe.
Well, Avigdor Lieberman is the foreign minister. He's not necessarily second in command.
He lives in the settlement areas, I believe. He's crazy. Like, that guy will definitely start something. You know, he hates all the Palestinians. He hates Arabs. He hates them all. You know, he's really extreme.
Well, it's certainly possible that if Netanyahu were to lose his office, that Lieberman would be chosen to replace him.
Yeah, Mike, did you hear the F-16 that got down? I read and also heard that there was 4 people rescued. Now, the F-16 only holds up to 2 people. So was there 2 more Zionists, 1 on each tail?
No, it's
unless there was another plane that got shot down also. Maybe there was 2 planes.
It might be. I know that they did hit 2 aircraft, and maybe the second crew punched out once they were over Israel, but I can't. Israel may just be hiding that. But yes, that particular configuration of the F-16, it's a 2-man crew, a pilot and a Rio.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure it's most likely a I don't know, did you hear what shot it down? It could have been the S-300 version 4 that they sold Syria before they brought in the S-400 to guard the Russian bases. But I know in Damascus was being protected by the S-400. So either way, it's a game changer.
It's definitely a game changer, and obviously the fact that they did not already have an anti-missile system on the Israeli border, they weren't expecting it. It's typical Israeli arrogance. They just thought they could fly on in and bomb things and fly on out and go home for lunch, but they definitely got caught this time.
Yeah, it's a shame. Lebanon should bring in some anti. I would think Lebanon would have anti-aircraft missile systems. Well, Israel would be in the box then.
Well, Lebanon is trying very hard to not give Israel a justification for an invasion, although the indications are that Israel's getting ready to invade them anyway.
That's all I wanted to say, Mike. Have a good show.
All right, thanks an awful lot, Dustin. We're going to let you go. Getting on back here to the news here. Here's a story I think that really illustrates the Israeli mindset. About 3 years ago, an Israeli military jeep flipped over and killed this guy, 21-year-old. His name was Abdullah Gnaimat, I think. And apparently, this month, the family got a bill from Israel demanding $28,000 for the damage to the Jeep. Now, this Abdullah had nothing to do with the Jeep flipping over. He was trapped under it for 3 hours while he bled to death. Israel says, "Yoos for the Jeep." That's tacky here. Okay, getting on over to Korea. Apparently, Kim Jong-un has hand-delivered an invitation to the South Korean President, Moon Jae-in, to meet in Pyongyang. And apparently, the invitation was met warmly. These two are still trying to find a way to reunify, free of the interference from the United States. But you just know the United States is going to try and find some way to mess this up. Because the U.S. does not want the Koreas to reunify. Because having the North Korean demon, the villain over there, allows the U.S. to justify a military presence in the Western Pacific. If the two Koreas reunify and they become buddy-buddy, then the first thing they're going to say is, well, you can take all your aircraft carriers and you can go home. Now, over in Myanmar, as you know, the Rohingya are being genocided. And apparently, aerial photos of the area are showing that the government is now bulldozing these settlements to basically erase all signs that they were ever there. So that's a very, very ugly situation over there. Now, over the weekend, there was a crash of a Russian passenger jet, took off from Moscow and crashed almost immediately after takeoff. And everyone is saying, well, Russian aviation and so forth. But it turns out there was some interesting people on board the plane, including the CFO of Rosatom Uranium-1 and one of the supposed Russian sources for Christopher Steele's dossier against Trump. Now, it's hard to imagine somebody crashing an entire plane to just get two targets, but we can't rule it out at this point. Certainly the deep state is in a state of panic. The Clintons are in a panic. The Uranium-1 deal is coming on out, and they're all thinking about how are they going to stay out of jail? How are they going to hang on to the money? Because all the money they made from the Rosatom deal can be confiscated under the RICO statutes. We're going to take a break now for a few commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to talk about the economic news here for a little bit. And interesting little article here coming out of the Hal Turner radio show, basically saying that something very interesting has surfaced this last week during the roller coaster ride on the Dow, which, by the way, is up about 300 points. The PPT is trying to get it shoved back up, make everybody relax. But apparently, the interbank lending index just dropped. And what that means is banks are not lending to each other. They're trying to maintain their own internal cash positions, and that may be a very worrisome signal that these banks are actually very short on their cash positions. They don't have a lot to lend to each other. Now, Russia may start dumping the US dollar in its trade with Iran. And this is not going to make either Russia or Iran very popular with Wall Street, which wants all of the world to be doing business using the US dollar, borrowed at interest from the Federal Reserve. That's how the private central banks make their money. And more countries are moving away from the private central banks, and they're starting to do business with their own indigenous currencies, many of which are value-based now. And that's a big reason for the escalation in the military here. Now, over in Hungary, their Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, is out there saying that he vows to fight those who want to change the Christian identity of Europe. And it is a problem. There are all these Muslims who are flooding on in to Europe, and they're not the polite, nice, live and let live kind of Muslims. They are the ones that want to come on in and establish Sharia law, and they want to basically force everybody to become Muslim, which is a very impolite and rude thing to do. So Viktor Orban is out there saying that we have to push back. This is our culture, our religion. We have a right to preserve it the way we, the indigenous people of this land, want to. And, of course, what you have from people like George Soros is, no, we're all going to blend it together. Reminds me, many years ago, this was like probably all the way back in the 60s, one of Ralph Bakshi's earliest animated films was called Wizards. And I remember this one sequence in there where they've gone into this church, which looks like a TV set figure, and they've got all the different religious icons up there, and they just flash one after the other. They've taken all the world's religions and they've blended them together. And it seems like that's what they're trying to do here. Now, George Soros, as you know, has come under a tremendous amount of criticism for his gift, financial support, to an anti-Brexit organization in Great Britain. And a lot of people have come on out and said it's really none of his business. He's originally from Hungary. He's a U.S. citizen. He should basically take his nose out of Great Britain's business. But of course, as you know, George Soros has this dream of a one-world government with his own sorry rear end polishing that golden throne of planet Earth. So Soros actually wrote an article in the Daily Mail basically trying to defend his plot to stop Brexit. And it comes across as arrogant and basically a clear air of superiority. I know what's best. I'm rich. I have to be smarter than you are. And apparently he's now going to spend an additional $138,000 on the anti-Brexit campaign. Now, I don't know what the laws... Basically, being a U.S. citizen, Soros is in violation of the Logan Act. You're not allowed to go on out and engage in foreign policy without the permission of the State Department or the White House. And that's what Soros is doing. He's going around the world affecting foreign policy, affecting the internal workings of these other countries. And I think he ought to be brought up and charged under the Logan Act and tossed in jail. And again, the displayed attitude, this disdain for the will of the people and the will of the voters, is very dangerous. And we're seeing, unfortunately, more and more of it in people like Soros, people like, Nancy Pelosi, Anybody who's out there saying the voters are too stupid to make these decisions, we have to force our way forward. Remember all the things they were saying about everybody who voted for Trump after he won the White House, that we were all obviously stupid and white supremacists and all this horrible thing. Well, democracy means the will of the people is the law of the land. And if you're not willing to accept that, then you better find another line of work. We need a zero-tolerance policy to this kind of autocratic thinking. We'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about globalism. We're talking about immigration. And again, getting on back to what that police officer who took the report on my stolen car was saying, we have a major problem with illegal immigrants in this country because many of them are turning to crime. Or maybe they were criminals in their past country and they just came here to evade prosecution. But apparently it is costing $2.7 billion with a B to pay for immigration and customs enforcement to keep an average of 52,000 illegal aliens every single day in detention. This is the highest ever level for the agency. Forget about detention. It's time to throw them back over the border. We can get those punkin' chunkin' guys with their air cannons, put the illegal immigrants in there and just fire them back across the border. Longest distance and the most number of bounces wins the prize. Sell the TV rights for it. Make some money off of this whole thing, I think. Now, here is a good story. I like seeing this. It's coming out of Activist Post. And apparently, over in Baltimore City, they're going to change their policy regarding abusive cops. They are actually getting ready to force police officers who act with malice during an attack on a citizen to pay the damages out of their own pocket and not stick the taxpayers with it. All I can say is it's about time. It's about time this happened. That is probably going to calm things down a little bit, because when you have a system where the cops are out there being abusive and when they get caught on camera and prosecuted, nothing happens to them. They'll get a letter in their employment folder. The taxpayers pay the bill. So that's a good thing that they did. I think all the cities should do that. I think the police officers of this country need to be told, if you behave outside the letter of the law, you are personally, financially liable for what you do. Do you remember when, I think it was Target, went along with this gender nonsense and allowed men to use the women's restroom if they say, I identify as a woman? And they lost a lot of business. People didn't want to go there anymore. They don't want to go to a store where they're afraid to go to the bathroom. And apparently, having learned nothing from that, Walgreens has now adopted that same policy. Men who identify as women are allowed into the women's restrooms in all of their 8,100 locations. And to nobody's surprise, they are now the target of a new petition. And it was a very reckless thing to do. I mean, getting back on over to Target, there were dozens of women and children victimized by male predators inside the Target store's ladies' room. So this political correctness has really reached a ridiculous point. Story coming out of KHOU.com. This is Austin, Texas. Apparently, this school gave as homework to their students to basically draw a picture of themselves as a slave. And this has got parents furious. They don't want to see anybody of any color having to relive the issue of slavery. Now, in this case, it was a white kid. And I have a question for this. How does having kids draw pictures of themselves as slaves, get them ready to have a real job in the real world? And the answer, of course, is it doesn't. It's more of this liberal indoctrination. This idea of making white people feel guilty for being white. Now, in this case, we're talking about a 12-year-old daughter. This 12-year-old daughter has never owned a slave, has never enslaved anybody. Why put this child through this? I refuse. I refuse to feel guilty about anything that is done outside my immediate control. I certainly refuse to feel guilty about things that happened before I was born. Nobody should feel guilty for things they themselves did not do. No, I don't. I wasn't alive back then. I had nothing to do with it. Actually, my ancestors ran a station on the Underground Railroad. Shouldn't the black people be giving money to me? You can see how silly the whole thing is. But again, it's part of the failure of education. We were talking last week about the terrible numbers coming out of the schools, where these kids are graduating high school with like 90% math illiteracy, 90% illiteracy, can't read, can't write, can't think, can't calculate. What are they going to do for a living? How are they going to find a job in a modern technological civilization with poor academic performance like that? But they all know that they're supposed to feel guilty for being white and that humans are warming the earth. Now, over in Duluth, apparently the schools have decided to remove some books from the curriculum, including To Kill a Mockingbird and Huckleberry Finn, one of Mark Twain's classics. And they're being removed from the curriculum because they use a racial slur. Apparently the local NAACP was fully on board with this. We have to get rid of books that use that racial slur. Now, obviously that racial slur is a bad thing to use in our day-to-day lives. But at the time depicted in To Kill a Mockingbird and Huckleberry Finn, it was a word that was in common usage. And one of the things I really detest about the politically correct movement is this idea that we have a right to judge how people behaved in other times based on our arbitrary set of rules, things that we think are bad. And if you do that, then you get a very distorted picture of history. You don't really know what was going on back then. You're getting a filtered picture of basically modern politically correct society in antebellum South. And that's not what it was like. It's not accurate at all. We give words too much power. We really do. I remember way back when Dog the Bounty Hunter temporarily lost his show because he'd used the racial slur in a private telephone conversation that was made public by a vindictive member of the family. And, oh, it's a terrible thing. He used the N-word. He did this, he did that, and he wound up losing his show. And then he got it back. And there was a big press conference here in Hawaii to which I was actually invited. And I got to speak with Dog, and I got to speak with some of the other people they had there. And I always ask them the same question. Have we not allowed words to have too much power over our lives? Because it's just a word. If you go to a newborn baby and you use the N-word and you smile, the baby will smile back at you. You have to be taught to be shocked at certain words. You have to be taught to be shocked at nudity. You have to be taught to be shocked at certain behaviors. You're not born with any of this. It's not natural or native to you. And we do. We give words too much power. We allow these words to shock us and upset us. To heck with that. All right, let's go over to Las Vegas. Apparently, there's something going on over there. The coroner finally released an autopsy report that he said was from Stephen Paddock. The report had the wrong size and wrong teeth, and everybody's saying it wasn't really him. So something happened to Stephen Paddock that they don't want to come on out. But a judge has now ruled that all documents from the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department's investigation of the October 1st shooting must be released within 30 days, including all video evidence and body camera footage. Oh my goodness, we just had a fire in the police building. All that stuff was gone. Now, the idea that the coroner has defied a court order to release the autopsies. I mean, he released the autopsies for the victims without names, without identifying who they are. They just have a number on them. And he was ordered to release the autopsy report on Stephen Paddock, and the person described in the report that was released is obviously not Stephen Paddock, so something is being covered up there. Whoever wants the cover-up to continue, though, they've come back with a new tactic. And apparently a widow of a slain Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department officer is suing to keep autopsy records from all 58 victims secret. Now, I could understand where the widow might want the autopsy report of her dead husband kept secret. But she's filed a lawsuit saying all the autopsy records of all the victims have to be covered up, have to be withheld from the public. And apparently the issue is that the ballistics reported in the autopsy don't line up. That there are obviously multiple guns being used. That's the only thing that makes sense. Last year, there was a Black Lives Matter activist, and he made headlines when he leaped across a police barricade to grab a Confederate flag away from a protester. And his name was Muhyiddin Move, also known as Muhyiddin Baha, was riding his bike in New Orleans, and apparently he was shot in the leg by an unknown assailant and was transported to the hospital, and the bullet must have severed the artery because he died in the hospital. Live by violence, die by violence here. All right, let's talk about some health and safety stuff here. Everybody in their kitchen has nonstick cookware. Most of it are variations on Teflon. And I need to preface this story with an explanation of just why Teflon was developed. If you thought it was invented to make nonstick cookware, you are wrong. Teflon was actually developed to line uranium centrifuges, because the feedstock for uranium centrifuges, uranium hexafluoride, is highly corrosive, and they wanted to come up with something that would allow the centrifuges to run without corroding. Simple, easy thing. And that's where Teflon came from. And then the scientists who were working with it over at DuPont just said, well, it is amazingly non-stick. They did a little experimenting and said, you know, we could sell this as a non-stick coating on cookware, which sounds like a wonderful little serendipity. But apparently, there are a lot of health risks in using Teflon cookware. And apparently DuPont, having tremendous amounts of money and influence, has been able to keep the health risks of Teflon under wraps until the resulting cancers and other illnesses became too common to ignore. And apparently they're seeing harm all over the place. And apparently, for some reason, Teflon is very popular along the Mississippi River. The whole region is dubbed Cancer Alley. Now, one chemical used to produce Teflon, known as C8, has been linked to 6 different diseases, including kidney cancer and testicular cancer. C8 is so prevalent that nearly every American has traces of it in their blood, maybe in the entire world. And C8 made its debut in Teflon manufacturing back in 1951, and because of its remarkable resistance to biodegradation and its tendency to easily escape into the air, it's been accumulating in the environment ever since. Now, they phased the C8 out, but many people are still dealing with its after effects. We're going to take a phone call from Alan in Australia. Aloha, Alan. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, how you going?
Hello?
Can you hear me?
I hear you.
And, well, first of all, I'd like to just sort of point out to everyone that last time I checked, Australia was a country, just for those university professors that are not aware of that.
Okay.
But what I'd like to bring up is a couple of times, I don't know if you've seen the story about the student that was failed because she said that Australia was a country, and the professor said, no, it was only a continent. We weren't a country. But anyway.
That's weird.
You mentioned a story. Yeah. I think it was last week about the lesbian couple that wanted to get married, and the fact that the baker didn't want to bake a cake for them.
Yes.
And I think you came out on the side of the baker. Do you still have that?
Well, it's somewhere. It's somewhere in the archives here, but you can do a Google search for it. But basically, this lesbian couple went to this baker and said, "We want you to bake a cake for our wedding." And the baker, because of her religious beliefs, said, "No, I can't do that, but I know a baker who will." And she referred the lesbians to this other baker. Now, normally you would think the lesbians would go to this other baker, but they had this attitude of, you will do what we want, you will accept us the way we are, and they tried to make a big deal about it. But the good news is that a judge eventually ruled that a baker's artwork, their baking, represents an exercise in the First Amendment, and that it was unreasonable for the lesbians to refuse to go to the other baker. So apparently this baker is off the hook now.
Do you or a loved one suffer migraine headaches? Listen to what scientist Kurt
Okay.
has to say.
Okay, we got to take a break.
People in the
We
United
got to take a break.
States suffer with
Stay on the
debilitating
line.
migraines.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. I think we're still talking with Alan in Australia. And Alan, I'm curious about this professor who corrected a student who said that Australia was a country. I've been to Australia on multiple occasions, and I certainly know it's a country. Where did this come out? Where was this professor teaching? Okay, I guess we lost Alan.
I'll just briefly come over the story. And the story was basically the university professor failed the student because they said that Australia was a continent, not a country. Ultimately, I read after that, there was another story came out that the professor was ultimately fired because it was such a bad case of not getting his facts right.
Yes.
And the student actually passed, so it ended up with a ending.
Well, that's a happy ending there, but I mean,
It was all over, probably.
how can anybody not say that Australia is a country? I mean, you've got the most interesting national anthem of any country on earth.
This is true.
True.
I just wanted to get back to the what I asked about the cake and that. Do you believe a gay person can choose their sexuality,
I think it's genetically mediated.
or it's how they are?
I think it's determined by
I'm gay.
genetics.
I'm a gay person.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm a gay person, and I've known my entire life, even when I was small, that I am gay.
Mm-hmm.
So it comes down to the fact, to me, that a gay person cannot choose, who they are. It's exactly the same as a black person can't choose the color of their skin. So to me, if a person is discriminated against because of who they are, it's not a good discrimination.
Well, I
because
agree
the
with you
baker
on
is
that one.
discriminating against these
I agree with you on that one.
The baker's discriminating against these people on who they are. Yeah, sorry, Mike.
My personal theory is that homosexuality is our built-in population control mechanism. and that gay people are indispensable to the long-term survival of the human race.
Yeah, I don't know if you're up with what's happened in Australia. We've just got equal rights with regards to marriage over here, and it's been a long, hard battle for us to be accepted. Like, for years we've been brutalised, bashed, beaten, and it's just, to me, having someone discriminate against someone with regards to their commerce, with regards to what they actually can and cannot buy, is a discrimination as if it was the colour of their skin.
I agree. And again, this is something that people are taught, usually by religion. And again, if you go to a newborn baby and say, "Hi, I'm gay," and you say it's smiling, they'll smile back at you. We're not born hating gay people. It's an acquired prejudice, if you will.
Exactly. And one last thing, I'd just like to point out that one of the main objectives of the mainstream media in the world at the moment is to keep us all segregated.
Yes.
And it's through words.
Absolutely. All right.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you for the call. We need to take a break for station identification. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And somebody actually sent me the story that Alan in Australia was talking about. And apparently it took place at Southern New Hampshire University. And they fired this lecturer who insisted that Australia was a continent but not a country. And apparently the student involved, Ashley Arnold, 27 years old, was studying toward an online sociology degree, and she'd been assigned to basically, students were to compare social norms between the United States and any other country, and she chose Australia. And she was flunked because the professor said Australia is a continent, not a country. And she thought it was a joke, but as she read on through the thing, she realized it was for real here. And apparently the student tried to gently inform the professor that, yes, Australia is a country, and it just escalated from there. The professor refused to apologize, and she's now been let go. Boy, the state of modern education, it is... Who doesn't know that Australia is a country? It's amazing here. Okay, getting on back to the Olympics. Apparently, they've got a growing problem with norovirus at the Pyeongchang Olympics. They have got 86 confirmed cases. None of the athletes have been infected yet. But it's a very serious illness. It's highly contagious. And the symptoms are diarrhea, stomach pain, vomiting, and nausea. And apparently the cases are concentrated in the Odaesan Youth Center, where 58 cases are confirmed. So, unfortunately, norovirus prefers the cold. The peak seasons are January, February. So it is the time of year when this thing is going to happen. Now, story coming out from Global Research up in Canada, and they're talking about the so-called Alzheimer's epidemic of unknown cause. They know some things will cause Alzheimer's, but apparently there's been a flood of Alzheimer's cases where they can't identify any causes. But apparently new research is showing that this unknown cause Alzheimer's is a iatrogenic drug and vaccine-induced epidemic. And as is usually the case, Big Pharma is trying to cover it up. They want to go on selling the products, and they want to avoid civil lawsuits. And we have seen that before with the link between vaccines and autism. They don't want to fix the problem. They just want to go on selling the product. And they figure if they can convince the public that it's safe, that's just as good as having a safe product. And no, that's not true. That's absolutely not true. And as the number of mandatory vaccines continue to rise, so does the incidence of autism and other neurotoxic diseases. And the attitude is, as long as it's making money, that's okay. You know, if you get sick, that's good too, because you come into the hospital, you go to the doctor, we make more money off of you. The whole medical industrial complex is dependent on the population being chronically, constantly ill. We were all to get healthy, the entire medical industrial complex would collapse. They don't want us healthy. It's a bad business model. It's one of the reasons why they're now on the warpath against homeopathic treatment, supplements. They don't want us taking care of ourselves. They want us dependent on them for our medical care, and that medical care is designed to keep us continuously ill. Now, here's an interesting little article. This came out of Burnett County Sentinel, and they're talking about our current flu season, which has been severe. So far, 45,000 people have died of this flu. And they're now talking about how this year's flu shot may be the culprit. Now, not too long ago, we were talking about how the process by which the vaccines are made is leading the pathogen to mutate. And we were looking at it in terms of the flu virus, the vaccine not being effective because they use chicken eggs to culture the flu virus. And in the process of culturing the virus in chicken eggs, the virus mutates to a form that is infectious to chickens. And because of that, we're being vaccinated for the wrong illness. Well, now they're starting to understand that the mutations can go beyond merely adapting to chickens and can actually produce a virus that is even more severe than the original virus they're vaccinating against. And they think that may be happening. And that's why this year's flu is so widespread and so potent. It's very sloppy science here. Okay, we're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, when you go into a hospital, the first thing you notice is it's very clean. All the surfaces are scrubbed, and the sinks are clean, and it looks really nice. But apparently there's been a new study published by the American Society for Microbiology that says the one place they're not cleaning out is the plumbing. Down in the drains, down in the toilet, they just flush stuff down there or wash stuff down there. And as a result, the plumbing is filling up with this gunk, which provides a perfect growth medium for superbugs. Now, the superbugs are infectious agents that are untouched by antibiotics, because apparently these bugs are down inside the gunk in the drains, and they're being exposed to very weak doses of antibiotics that are simply being washed down as part of the medical waste. And so over time, they're breeding an immunity to the antibiotics, and they're saying this is where these superbugs are coming from. Now, I always thought that they dealt with medical waste a little more severely, like incinerators, but apparently hospitals are just washing the stuff down the sink drains, and it's creating a bit of a problem. So let's talk about computers and all kinds of things like that. There has been a major leak of the source code for the iPhone. And somebody just posted source code for a core component of the iPhone's operating system on GitHub. And they're saying this is the biggest leak in history. Obviously, Apple tries to keep their source code very, very secret. And the problem is that this source code, now that it's out there, is going to allow hackers to find more vulnerabilities in the in iOS and make iPhone jailbreaks easier to achieve. Now, for those of you who don't understand what I mean by that, when the iPhone first came on out, Apple's attitude is it's a locked device. You're not allowed to get in there. You're not allowed to log into it. and you're only allowed to install approved applications. And the idea of a jailbreak is that you modify the iPhone to open it up so that you can go on in with a telnet and actually look at the file system. It's basically a Linux operating system in there. And you can just look at what's going on, just out of curiosity. And you can install apps that are not approved by Apple. And there are websites out there, or there were websites out on the dark web, where you could get all kinds of new apps for the iPhone. And by the way, this is a very dangerous thing to do, because once you jailbreak the phone, a lot of the security goes away, and it can become very unstable very quickly. And the apps that are out there for jailbroken phones are not well written. They can cause problems, not to mention the fact a lot of them have malware. So when I got my first iPhone, I jailbroke it because I wanted to go on in and look at it. And then after I'd looked around, I did a full reset, restore back to the factory settings, and I haven't gone back into the iPhone since then. That was just my curiosity. But apparently this core code represents a major break in security for Apple, and they're probably going to have to do some serious rewriting and patching and updating to basically make the leaked version of the source code obsolete. Now, speaking of Apple, they have now come out with what's called the HomePod Smart Speaker. It's aimed at music lovers, apparently, along with being a voice assistant. It has a high-quality sound system as well. So you can say, play Beethoven's Ninth, and it will play Beethoven's Ninth with a really high-quality sound. And Apple, over the years, has actually come out with some very nice sound systems here. This is a $300 appliance, but again, it's another device that puts a microphone in your home. And I'm really not comfortable with that. I haven't even turned Siri on my iPhone 7. Let's take a phone call here from Steve Elkins. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Michael, headlines today, I saw that NASA is considering privatizing the International Space Station, and I wanted to get your comment on that. You think that's a good thing to do or not? And the second question I had to follow up with that is, how much do you actually think NASA is, percentage-wise, working on science-related issues versus military, satellite surveillance, and who knows what else, weaponry maybe? How much is actually science and how much is really the other?
Well, the first question is, I think the privatization of space is inevitable, and I think it's a good idea. But I don't know if you ever saw this. There was one space shuttle flight where they carried this inflatable can of Coca-Cola into orbit and took pictures of that. And I don't have a problem with privatization of the space station. In fact, that's something that was predicted in the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey, where the space station is all Pan Am, this, and Hilton, and the rest of it. So I think it's inevitable, and it certainly helps defray the cost to the taxpayers. This space station, though, does have a finite lifespan, and they're already talking about deorbiting it. Now, as far as NASA itself, I don't have much contact with NASA anymore, but when I was there, there was some classified work that was being done for the military, but most of that is done by what is now the National Reconnaissance Office, that will contract for their own reconnaissance satellites from the various vendors, private companies that build the satellites, and they're launched into orbit mostly by the Air Force. There's actually two parallel space agencies in this country. There's NASA, which is the civilian agency, and then there's the Air Force. Now, occasionally for really large launches, they'll contract to Cape Kennedy because they've got the larger launch pads down there. But mostly, my recollection is they were, for the most part, very separate.
Yeah, I understand we're still working with the Russians, right? In this space station, we're still working with the Russians, correct?
Yeah, we have to. We don't really have a choice. There's no other way for Americans to get up to the ISS until SpaceX finishes its new space capsule.
It's too bad we can't take that philosophy up in space, working with the Russians there, down here on Earth and work with them better here.
I absolutely agree with you, and I remember that beautiful golden time after the Soviet Union collapsed, and we were all friends with Russia. And then Putin basically took control of the central bank, and all of a sudden all the neocons are saying, ooh, bad Putin, and we're back in the new Cold War, because that's profitable for the military-industrial complex.
Yes, it is. Hey, thank you, Michael. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Okay, getting on back here. Another article out of Global Research. It's called Fake News is Fake News. And it's basically celebrating the demise of these so-called fake news filters that were being implemented by Facebook and Google because they haven't worked on out. They tend to flag real news as fake. They let a lot of other stuff go on through. People have started moving away from those platforms because of the very obvious censorship. And so Facebook and Google are basically backing off from all of that with the realization that this whole scream about fake news is itself fake news, because most of what's out there is very accurate. Now, what the purveyors of the fake news hysteria are trying to do is convince you that anything that is not on the corporate media cannot be trusted, when obviously history has taught us exactly the opposite. What's on the corporate media cannot be trusted, and that's why so many people are coming to the independent media, and corporate media's audience continues to fall. And now we're hearing that some of these corporate media CEOs are literally trying to lobby the government to basically shut down independent media. Say, we represent a danger to their circulation. We represent a danger to their ability to control the minds of America. And so we're getting into a little bit of a fight here. Okay, we're going to take another phone call. James in Ohio. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi. I wanted to get your thoughts on the NXT blockchain development platform and how it could be used for purposes other than cryptocurrency. And also, you know, the car thing, I'm terribly sorry to hear that. I had the same situation in like 1998. It was a classic SJ6 that we wouldn't have had if she hadn't known a doctor who was financially distressed. And in this case, they didn't mess it up, fortunately, but we did have to travel 500 miles from Cincinnati to Georgia to get it back. And I can say this now, since the statute of limitations has expired, but we were so financially distressed ourselves at the time that I had to forge insurance documents to get the car back from the private yard. And yeah, I did the walking around in the parking lot thing, thinking, I know we left it right around here.
Yeah,
I know exactly how you feel, and I'm terribly sorry. I would, set up a GoFundMe or something for you if I could only have a bank account. But unfortunately, maybe somebody out there has a car that they can donate if we could only get it to Hawaii.
Yeah, that's about 1,000. But now the fact of the matter is that Claire and I had already decided it was time to get a newer car, and we have been saving up for that. And we had a very generous donor over the holidays who sent us a big chunk of cash for getting a new car. So we're already looking to get a new car. It was just we wanted to take the time to get a good deal. And what was really angering was the fact that we went through this whole thing about the car being stolen just a few months ago. And so I'm walking on out Sunday morning. I got armloads of MIDI gear and sheet music, and it's an empty spot. And it's almost like the opening of the movie Goodbye Girl. Where this lady, her car is stolen, then her son's bike is stolen, and it's just one thing after the other, after the other, after the other, and it was it was a rough situation. And then, of course, we got awakened very early this morning. They found the car. Unfortunately, it's been stripped. And probably, I'm expecting the insurance company is going to say it is a write-off, because being 18 years old, there's no value there.
Right.
It's got 165,000 miles on it.
What we took away from it was, well, at least they didn't come to our homes in order to rob us and stick a gun in our face, you know.
Well, in our case,
So
we have alarms on the house, because about 4.5, 5 years ago, we had druggies literally living on both sides, next door neighbors. And so we've got cameras on our approaches to our home, and we've got alarms on all the doors. We just didn't have an alarm on the car because we didn't think it was necessary.
Maybe next time, maybe the next car you can have a couple well-placed concealed toggle switches.
Yeah, I'm going to have to do something, because they got right past that club. That was very annoying. We got to take a break for commercials. James, stay on the line. I'm going to come right back to you. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with James in Ohio. And before we got talking about the car, you were mentioning NXT blockchain. And I'm looking at this on the web right now, and apparently it's basically a source for people to develop their own blockchain applications. And obviously it's pitched toward financial transactions. But I would think that this kind of technology is going to be useful for any kind of communication where you need to be sure that what you're getting at either end is what was sent. And that it hasn't been altered. So there's all kinds of possibilities of communication, and not just
plus it can, you know,
inventory
be used
control.
To fortify our Fourth Amendment.
It could very well be. It could very well be. And I don't know. I might take my 10,000 Monkeys code and see if it can be converted to a blockchain application.
Right. Okay, that's all I had for you. Again, sorry about the trouble you had.
Yeah, it was really frustrating. Thank you very much for the phone call.
Right, bye-bye.
We're going to let him go. Yeah, whatever Claire and I get. Now, we're not going to be able to get something plush, but what really disappointed me, after the last time it got stolen and the ignition lock was messed up, we got one of those security clubs. And when the officer came to take the report about the car, and he says, yeah, the crooks can just cut the steering wheel. They didn't even do that. Apparently the lock on the club was so fragile, they just snapped that and threw it on the floor. Which, again, is emblematic of manufacturing and retail in this country. They sold me a security device that wasn't secure. Now, getting on back to the computers here. As you know, there's been a big problem with this Spectre bug. And it's a mess. There's no two ways about it. The Spectre and the Meltdown, every solution they've come up with basically involves sacrificing a lot of the speed people pay for on their fast machines. And people who are doing compute-intensive applications like animation or artwork or music, I do all the mixing of Claire's music on this machine here, we're losing that compute power. And especially for an animation company, that is a major hit on the bottom line. And yes, you can buy an additional computer, but that's very frustrating when you buy a computer to be a certain speed, certain throughput, and you find out it's got a problem, and the only fix is to slow it down. And apparently some of the early patches put on out have resulted in machines locking up, rebooting, in some cases actual data corruption. So Intel has released yet another microcode to address the stability and reboot issues on systems for the Skylake PCs. And this hopefully will fix the problems that they were getting in the Lenovo, HP, and Dell, which, I mean, it just keeps on going. There are BIOS problems. It's a major, major issue. And again, I am of the opinion these are not design flaws in the chips, because these similar systems are on all of Intel's chips going way, way, way back. And to me, it looks like this was one of these NSA-mandated hardware backdoors where they can come on in and bypass whatever security you have put on your computer so that they can spy on you. Because after all, anybody listening to this radio show is a terrorist. I'm not a terrorist, by the way. I'm annoying, I'm obnoxious, I'm irritating, but I am not a terrorist. Now here's another story coming out of Apple for the iPhone X. And apparently two friends, they didn't even want to do this. They weren't trying to do anything. One of them got the iPhone X, set it up for the facial recognition, and apparently his best friend picked up the phone and the phone unlocked. They weren't even trying to hack it. This one guy set up the phone with the facial recognition, his friend picked it up, and the phone unlocked. Just think about that. Somebody could pick up this phone, and they could make contactless payments, send messages, make calls. Now, Apple is saying it's a 1 in a million thing here. I don't think so. I think they just messed it up. I think they should have stayed with that little button that takes your fingerprint. That was secure. I remember one time I had an accident and I gouged my finger, and the phone wouldn't unlock for me because the fingerprint had changed. That was a nice, simple, elegant system. Remember when they did the product unveiling, and it wouldn't unlock for the guy that it was supposed to? They really messed that up. All right, we're going to take another break here for commercials. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, this is probably going to be something that people need to be very concerned about. Anybody who runs a website, you have to go through what's called a domain registrar. And it is the domain registrar that basically says this name is taken, and usually they'll provide the pointers for DNS to map that name onto the IP of the physical server, so that when you type whatreallyhappened.com or republicbroadcasting.org into your computer, it maps to the IP, number, and you will get the computer. There's a registrar out there called Namecheap, and it's, as the name implies, it's very inexpensive. But apparently there is a problem, because Namecheap has admitted that it lets their customers set up and control subdomains for domain names belonging to other customers. And this allows hackers to distribute malware from strangers' websites. And that really is rather tacky of them to do. And obviously, if there's malware detected on your website, even if it's a subdomain that you don't even know is there, you get flagged as malicious by Google's search engine, which blocks the website. All right, let's take a phone call. Francis in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, aloha to you both.
Aloha.
I tell you what, couple quick thoughts for you. One, when you're talking about using your fingerprint or whatever have you to open up your electronic toys and so forth, and yes, I call them toys. I don't look at them as tools or whatever. But I'm reminded of a couple of films. One is The Sixth Day with Arnold Schwarzenegger many, many years ago, so I'm trying to keep from telling on my age, as well as Minority Report with, Tom Cruise, where you're either using of course, and again, unless the body happens to be cloned or whatever, you're using your thumbprint or fingerprint or whatever to access various areas of a given building or whatever the case is.
Mm-hmm.
Or you're going through an eye scan or what they call ID check or whatever, where they scan the back of your eye electronically in order to access various areas as well. And so it's really cracking me up this day and time that how do we know that we're not being done that way now? Eye scanning wise, I mean, having to use your finger automatically, that's your freedom of will if you wish to do that. But if you're being eye scanned to access a certain area that should be accessible ordinarily without special permission, how do we know that we're not being eye scanned now as is in the everyday public wherever we happen to be going without being forewarned of that? The reason I say that is because at one point I went to visit an acquaintance, and they had what is called, well, at least that's the name of it. It was like a tower that's about a foot tall or whatever, and it was called a Lexus or something, or at least that's the name that was given to it for whatever reason. And it had along the outer, the edge or the rim of it, at the top of it, a light that went around in a circle or whatever of some sort of illumination.
Yes.
And basically the owners would say, okay, lights on, lights off or whatever, like a remote control deal or whatever. And it really freaked me out because I thought, this could go in so many wrong directions, such as even when I'm chatting with them, my voice could be recorded and used against me or used for the wrong purposes. If it is being recorded by this machine or whatever that they're using for other purposes, for controlling the lights in their household. And so I kind of jokingly made a comment about that, and they thought it was humorous, but at the same time they're like, nah, whatever. And so, but how does the everyday person really know that? They don't.
Well, first of all, let's step on back to what you were talking about. The kind of eye scanning that they showed in Minority Report is very difficult to do from a distance. That was a device. You can scan the iris and you can scan the back of the eye, but you have to be very close to it. And they've already figured out ways where they can spoof an iris scan with contact lenses. Now, I know it's possible to hack the fingerprint scanner on an iPhone. And the way I deal with that is there's nothing on the iPhone that is sensitive information. I use it to make calls and send text messages, check the weather and that kind of thing. But I don't have any banking information on there. I don't have any credit card information on there. So if somebody steals the phone and they succeed in getting into it, there's nothing there that they can use. And I would basically recommend to everybody that this is probably a good way to keep yourself safe and secure, is leave all your banking information at home on your desktop computer and not have it in the cell phone unless you really need it. Now, obviously, you've got a wallet. You can keep your credit cards in there, and you can get wallets that will block the radio chip in modern credit cards from being accessed, because that actually happened to Claire once some years ago. Now, as far as the voice assistants, one of the problems I have with it is that your voice is being sent to a central server, ostensibly for some high-powered speech recognition. But the voice could be recorded, and it could be used for some other kind of voice print. In my case, I'm not interesting enough where somebody's going to do that, but it is an issue.
Yeah. It's interesting because you touched upon one thing that, I know what it was. If anything, make your cell phone toy, or whatever you're going to call it, as boring as possible.
Yes.
Which I tend to do this with anyway, which leads me to the aspect of regarding your laptop. There was something I learned about a year or so ago about how to go in, which I don't remember how to do now, and turn off the sound that whenever you're talking, it does not record it on your laptop. I don't remember the process of how you do it, but I did, and I was stunned that it was actually recording it, to the point that I also had to go and actually put a sticky cover of sorts over the what would be considered the camera part of your laptop or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So it's covered, and it cannot see anything of what you're doing facially or whatever, or in back of you in your background for that matter. As a result, just recently, I ended up having to finally offer my other half to do that for him because he, to him, he's like, oh, whatever, big deal. And so, reason being is that I've come to learn that even though he has an issue with his computer coming up whenever he turns it on, and he's busy doing other stuff in the meanwhile while it's trying to come up or whatever after a minute or two, which is kind of bizarre to me. I offered to do that for him. At least it slightly changed the process because, one, he wasn't being viewed as to what he was doing, and so whatever was going on with his computer was actually going a little bit faster than it was before because, for some reason, the delay didn't seem like something that should have been a normal process. I mean, you're talking about electrons or whatever, or electricity going through there and operating the systems. It shouldn't take like a minute or two to bring your computer up for that matter.
That depends on what startup programs you have. And yes, the startup time can vary greatly as the machine gets patched and updated. That's going to change the startup time. My wife's computer comes up very, very quickly. This machine here on my desktop takes a very long time to come on up because there's a lot of stuff that loads on boot up, including stuff that's involved with the production of whatreallyhappened.com. So I wouldn't be too concerned about that. And again, in terms of laptops, don't have information on there that can be used against you. One of the things you need to be worried about, of course, is that when you go through an airport checkpoint, TSA is now allowed to basically grab your electronic devices and just copy off whatever on them. And for that very reason, again, you don't want to have stuff that's on there. I have a netbook, an old XP netbook. It's very small. That's the machine I travel with. And the reason I do that is because many years ago in Seattle, TSA dropped and wrecked a very expensive, nice laptop of mine. They didn't apologize. They didn't replace it or anything. And so now I have this netbook. There's nothing on it except the bare minimum web browser, email, that kind of stuff. There's nothing else on it at all. And so TSA can look at that machine all they want. They're not going to find anything of any interest.
Well, two quick last thoughts for you. One, he tends to do what's called bringing up a task manager to see what's actually running. And I thought, okay, that doesn't make any sense to me, but apparently it did to him or probably to you for that matter. As for taking electronic toys is concerned, flying, which I haven't done in over 10 years or whatever for that matter for own personal reasons, I don't tend to bring any more electronic stuff with me than I absolutely have to have. They have to be pestered by them because now, the last time I flew, I actually had, in order to avoid the full bias scanner, I actually had to opt out just to avoid going through that garbage because that was, to me, was invasion of my privacy.
Yes.
But for that matter, and to say the least, they're not gentle with the pat down for that matter. And so, well, I'll put it this way, I had to forewarn them. I said, just so you know, my skin is hypersensitive, so mind yourself. What do? They get in areas they shouldn't be patting, they did, and I jumped, to say the least. So, and they said, what's the matter with you? I said, I told you my skin is hypersensitive. What part of that did you not get? So, to say the least, that was over 10 years or so ago, and after that, and if I go anywhere, I'll drive. The heck with it. I have a lot better scenery and a lot less headache and not so many pains in the tail as I would be with having to go with flying. So
that doesn't work for me here in Hawaii. What am I going to do? Drive a quarter mile, come up for air, drive a quarter mile, come up for air, drive a quarter mile, come up for air.
Good point. Anyway, y'all have a great one. Take care.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Okay, speaking of security, apparently a group of IEEE researchers basically are saying that they figured out how you can be tracked using your cell phone even if you turn GPS and Wi-Fi off. Now, this really isn't all that new an idea because they can pretty much find where you are triangulating with the cell phone towers. So they know approximately where you are, and apparently they came up with this attack dubbed Pin Me, which combined data from the phone and non-phone sources to work out where the user is. So yes, privacy is a thing of the past. And again, if you're going someplace you don't want to be tracked on, you leave the phone at home, or you get one of these cases that temporarily blocks the phone off. Or if you want, you can actually find online a GPS jammer that plugs into the accessory shoe, they used to call it a cigarette lighter, of your car. And it sends out a bogus GPS signal, so anybody who's trying to read your GPS location from your smartphone, they're going to see that you're up in Alaska somewhere. Let's take another phone call here from Charlie in Los Angeles. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, I just want to call in and tell you I'm not scared. These people in the NSA, in the CIA, whoever they are, trying to keep track of them, are in an ocean of information. Okay, I've got maybe... You take a simple Yahoo account and the spam account, the spam email box.
Yes.
If you don't delete that after a year, you got 100,000 emails. There's just too much data.
Yeah,
all they
I
can
agree.
do is condition you into being scared. They can just condition you to be into good behavior. It's just absolutely too much data. I haven't used virus software since 2004. I think identity theft is a hoax. It's just too much data. I mean, how can you make sense out of anything? They don't have the bodies to go on these wild goose chases. You know, I mean, it's just absolutely a hoax. It's propaganda. It's just, I don't fall for it, but most people do. Most people feel like the refrigerator's listening in on them, and it works. It's a good idea for the government to try to get as much good behavior out of people, but
no, I remember when I was on my diet, you know, I'd stand in front of the refrigerator and just complain about how I couldn't eat anything, and the refrigerator would go, I know. You're absolutely right. They can't watch everybody, but obviously people who are of interest to them, they can certainly monitor absolutely everything that they're doing.
Yes, they can. Yeah, if they're looking into somebody that's possibly under a FISA warrant, but they might be thinking of their organized crime. Yeah, they could probably tap into your cell phone if they got your number. But there's just too much data. You think you're going to get somebody's computer? Well, they got a router. They got other people on the computer. None of this crap is provable in court. If you have fingerprints on a gun, a good attorney, a good defense attorney can rip that apart in court. Fingerprints are there just to scare you into a confession. Mm-hmm. So it's all subjective. I mean, they don't know for sure. Even with your IP address, that is not provable data in court.
Yeah, because it's possible to spoof it. I mean, there have been a lot of cases. I mean, that's why they can't find the hackers.
Even if you
they spoof the IPs. I mean, when
I got a router with no IP address on it.
Well, you have to have an IP. Something you have to have an IP, or your ISP is not going to communicate with you.
Have a password. Anybody could use it. You know, so it's just they're just second guessing.
Well, they certainly haven't found any terrorists with all of this stuff. They haven't found any terrorists with it at all. And yeah, a lot of it is a bluff. And the Nazis did it to the German people. They deliberately cultivated this idea that the Gestapo heard everything, could see everything, they could almost read your mind, and the German people fell for it. And yes, the NSA has a tremendous amount of ability to get into our electronic devices, but for people who've actually got something to hide, it's easy enough to evade them. I proved that with my 10,000 Monkeys code. You can write encryption the NSA cannot break, and that's where it is. All right, Charlie, need to let you go. Need to take a break for commercials. Got another call waiting when we come on back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to go back to the telephones now. Jerry in Chicago, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today? Jerry, are you there?
Hello?
You're on the air. What's on your mind?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't hear anything. Hey, anyway, you touched on something about GPS on the cell phone. I got a little story to tell you. About a year and a half ago, I went up to a river thing about 100 miles away from me, and I know I get no cell phone service there. So when I pulled in, I had turned my phone off in the car, figured I'll save whatever battery I have left on it.
Mm-hmm.
Next morning, I got up, walked to the car. I wanted to check the phone, and I had 8% charge, and it was blinking. It wouldn't even turn on until I charged it for a while.
Okay.
So there is a back door to use these batteries and everything else like that for this search mode, or let's try to pinpoint where you were at and that type of thing. And it's a Galaxy 5 phone.
Well, probably what was happening is when you're away from a cell tower, the cell phones will increase the transmitter power trying to find a cell phone tower, and that's going to run your battery down. The only way that you can save your battery is to literally put it into the equivalent, well, on the iPhone they call it airline mode, where it shuts off the cell phone functions. Because even if it's turned off, it's still trying to ping that cell phone tower. And if it can't find one nearby, it ramps up the transmitter power until it does.
Oh, okay, I'll agree with you on that one. But, you know, let's think about this. You turn it off, and when you think you turn it off, you're not turning it off.
No, you're not.
That is the real kicker to me. So, and now I hear that the new Samsung 8, which I have insurance for a Samsung 5. So when it gets messed up, I just simply ask for the same damn phone that I'm used to. I don't want anything new. I hear that the new ones, everything from 5 or 6 up, is all you can't access the battery.
Now that's a shame. I remember on Claire's Galaxy, and it was the Galaxy Note 4. We had a real problem with batteries. I had to replace the battery 3 times. Of course, you can't access the battery on the iPhones either.
Okay, but I mean, now you can't just take your phone in and say, here's my battery, I need a new one. Hey, I don't know what it is, but because I've got issues with this battery too. You can't do that on a newer Galaxy because you can't access it. You got to actually turn your phone in. Somebody's got to work on it if they can work on it. What does that tell you when they tell you that you can't tamper with the power source of your cell phone?
Well, that's been a trend in manufacturing for some time. They don't want you to fix your own cell phone, your own laptop, your own car. I remember I ran into that when we had the Xterra. I mean, they're designed to be mass assembled, and when you wear them out, you throw them away. And I had a problem on the Xterra where it was leaking oil under the valve covers, and then I discovered that the gaskets for the valve covers are part of the head gasket that goes all the way through the car. There's no way to just replace them. But more and more states are now starting to talk about the right to repair. And I think it's a good idea. They're going to force manufacturers to create products that the end user is free to repair themselves. Okay?
Thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks. We'll be back with more phone calls after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, hour number 3. And before we go back to the phones here, I need to issue a correction. Earlier in the show, we reported on a story from the Hal Turner Show claiming that the CFO of Rosatom died on this Russian plane crash. It turns out that is fake news. So I've deleted it from the website, and I'm letting you all know Hal apparently got it wrong. Okay, getting on back to the phones here. Al in Canada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike.
Hi.
I hope you're well.
As well as can be expected.
That's good. You were talking about, the cell phone trying to find a tower. I believe that term used to be roaming, and I think people still get charged for that. What a novel idea.
Well, roaming means that you're using a cell tower that's not owned by your cell phone company, your cell phone provider. And yeah, they do charge more for that. The idea being that if you're using, for example, we're with AT&T, And if we're using AT&T's cell towers to communicate, it's one price. If we go outside AT&T and use somebody else's towers, it's going to cost a lot more. Most phones, though, have a little setting that you can flip over saying don't use roaming. It basically means that you're going to be cut off from service occasionally, but you won't get those surprise payments.
Sounds good to me. One of the things about a cell phone is, you know what, Mike? I've never had one.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want one. I don't need one. So, you know, the way I see, as a matter of fact, I have Magic Jack. I don't know whether you've ever heard of that or not. It costs, you know, about $3.50 a month.
Yeah, I've seen that. I have a friend who had that. The problem with Magic Jack, though, is you got to have your computer on all the time to receive phone calls.
Yes and no. You can actually hook it up to a router.
Okay.
So, yeah. Anyway, I wanted to talk about the surveillance state because it has a lot to do with cell phones. Just don't use one. If you feel so strongly about being spied on, then don't use one. I mean, you know what, Mike? I bet you any money when you were young, you did some things that were a little illegal, right? And are you in jail? No. Are you being persecuted by the police? No.
I'm trying. Well, yes, I've been persecuted ever since Vince Foster.
Well, you know what I'm trying to get at? Like, just people in general, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, these people, they're our employees, for crying out loud. It doesn't belong to them. It belongs to us, the taxpayer. If as soon as anybody works for the taxpayer, and they always have, they don't own any of this stuff. We own it. The people that actually had to work and pay for it, not only to pay for that, but to pay for the upkeep, the people that actually do the work in our stead. So, you know, we shouldn't be terrified. We should be the ones that are pointing the finger back at them and saying, you'll do what we want. Like, you know, like this partisan divide and conquer crapola, it's out of control.
I agree.
It's even up here in Canada, Mike. It's brutal. They play on it.
I absolutely agree. And yeah, governments seem to think that civil servant is equivalent to civil master. And every once in a while, the people are going to have to put the government back in its place. I think we're about coming up on that kind of an incident here in this country. I'm hoping that it will be relatively peaceful. But yeah, there's a lot of angry people out there. And they are concerned that the Bill of Rights is being ignored. And it's not that we're doing anything wrong. It's that we do value our privacy. We don't want the government looking over our shoulder at absolutely everything that we do. If I stop at the bakery and I get a jelly donut on the way home from work, it's nobody's business but me and the baker.
It's called being secure in our person.
Yes.
You have it in your Constitution. We have it in the Canadian Constitution. And it shall not be infringed upon. I mean, if they write any law that flies in the face of that, it's null and void. It's already been tried in the United States. By the way, there was, just quickly now, a guy defended his property against a would-be thief in Canada and went to court, and he got acquitted.
Yes.
He wasn't charged with murder. He got off. And you know what the Prime Minister of Canada said?
What?
All 12 of those jurors doing their civic duty are racist.
That's
Mr. People Kind Trudeau. He just sealed his fate.
I think so.
You know, I know you referenced the CBC a couple of times. You know, the Canadian Censorship Bureau here up in Canada. They sponsor propaganda website that costs taxpayers $1 billion a year. You know, you just look at the comments briefly, and you can see it. More and more people, they're turning on this guy. And it's good. It's a good thing. It's a good thing. I mean, carbon taxes, Mike, he's charging me to breathe, for crying out loud, to be alive. I have a right to defend my life. And yet he wants to tax it. And he wants to tax the right for me to be alive by taxing me to breathe. It flies in the face of the Canadian Constitution. These people just don't get it. We're not as dumb as you people think we are. You know, everything they do is against the law.
Well, I think there's a pushback, and it's not just against Trudeau. I think we're seeing the beginning of a pushback against liberalism in general and political correctness especially, because it's just become a caricature of itself. And people are just saying, this is insane. This idea that some guy, some pervert can say, I identify as a woman and be allowed to use the women's restroom. It's utterly absurd.
Yes, it is. It is utterly absurd. And at the same time, I mean, it's utterly absurd to give one people, whoever they are, more rights than other people, and yet we're all Canadian citizens or American citizens or wherever you live. I mean, that just flies in the face of everyone is equal. We all have the right to due process. And then all of a sudden they write these little laws that, but unless you're this group of people, then you're special. You know, what kind of nonsense is that?
We've got that down here in the United States. I mean, we have all these homeless people. We have all these homeless people, including homeless veterans, who are getting no support from the government. Meanwhile, the government is lavishing all kinds of money and free stuff over the illegal immigrants and the refugees. It's a very screwed up set of priorities, and it needs to change. We need to lock up our borders. We need to find all of these illegal immigrants. We need to find all these refugees who do not qualify for refugee status, and we need to fling them over the border.
Yep, that's right. People actually wait in line for, to get into other countries. Anyway, Mike, I say God bless you, but instead I'm going to say Claire bless you.
Yeah, she does.
Thanks a lot for your time.
She does. Thanks an awful lot there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And we're going to switch over. First of all, we're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And we're going to go to Kevin in West Virginia. Aloha, Kevin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mr. Mike, I hope you're feeling a little better. I had a couple things I wanted to talk to you about, and actually a ton of questions about this downed Russian plane.
Yes.
Man, is this... I'm sorry, but I feel like this is adding to the Clinton body count, maybe?
Well, it turns out that the claim that the CFO of Rosatom was on the plane is fake news. I don't know why Hal Turner was carrying it, but he did. But it's been debunked.
Okay, that just that kind of like blew my mind. The other thing, wow, I was listening to your last caller. Wow, that's absolutely insane. And I wanted to make a comical point here with you. I'm blind, of course. I'm losing my eyesight. But I wonder if I could pull this off as identifying as a trans-sighted person and being able to go and get a driver's license again.
I love it. I love it. Listen, boy, I wish I could find that article again. But apparently there was, I think it was in Time magazine earlier this year, and it was the 25 inventions that most impacted society, and a lot of them were just gadgets and gizmos. But apparently there is a set of glasses which allow partly sighted people to have normal vision. And apparently there's a TV camera and some image processing that goes on inside these goggles, and then it presents on screen inside the goggles in front of each eye this modified image. And apparently it adjusts and adapts to your specific vision problem. And I wish I could find that, because it does sound like it's a wonderful device.
Absolutely. I mean, I like it. I'm grateful for advances in technology and, especially in the medical field and everything like that. But a part of me, and this is, I identify as a Christian. I believe there's a God. That doesn't necessarily make me a Christian. I know that. But I'm worried or wondering about CRISPR or Cas9 systems. If I go and alter my DNA, am I therefore then still human? I mean, I don't know if you understand my question there.
Would you run that by me again? I was trying to hunt down those goggles.
Oh, they've been having talking about CRISPR-Cas or CRISPR-Cas9, this gene editing tool.
Yes.
I've been doing a lot of research on that. But I'm having the moral dilemma: if altering my genes or altering my DNA, am I still human if I do that? I mean, that's kind of one of the big questions that is stopping me from, allowing them to do any experimentation with Casper-Cas9 or CRISPR or whatever it's called. Because apparently the eye disease I have, retinitis pigmentosa,
yes.
Gene editing and gene manipulation or gene therapy would work for me. But I'm having that dilemma as, I don't want to alter my DNA. Am I still human if I alter my DNA and use this? Is one of the moral questions that I have.
Well, let me put it this way: your humanness is based on a lot more than your DNA. It's certainly based on your intellect, your mind. You being a Christian, it's your soul. So I would say, again, you want to make sure they don't make any mistakes in the editing. But if they can fix your eyesight with this technology, I would say go with it. Meanwhile, I found this article. This is the 25 Best Inventions of 2017, last year, and the goggle is called the eSight 3. And basically, this is for people who are legally blind but still have some vision. It's touted as the world's most powerful pair of glasses. It records high-definition video and uses magnification, contrast, and proprietary algorithms to enhance that imagery into something the legally blind can see. It is, unfortunately, pricey. It's $10,000, but it does sound like something that might work. But again, the gene therapy, if they can fix you that way, I would be willing to undergo gene therapy. If they could make me look like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, and I don't think it would change my humanity one bit.
Right, I understand. But yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you about was the Russian downplane. I kept hearing, and thank you for telling me about that. That can take one less thing off my plate. Mm-hmm. And thank you for with the gene editing question. And like I said, I wanted to be a little bit funny about well, I think I should identify as a trans-sighted person and throw a big stink about this, but I'm not going to. But I just thought it was a humorous and hilarious
It is funny.
thing.
It is funny.
Everybody else is doing it.
Demand a pilot's. Forget about driving. Get a pilot's license.
Right, might as well go for it all, right?
Go for broke on that one.
Well, you have a great day, and give Miss Claire the best, and I hope you have a wonderful day and have a great rest of the show.
Well, thank you very much, and we're going to let you go now. Thank you for the phone call. Okay, the phone lines are now open, and getting on back to the computers here. Remember not too long ago there was this huge data breach from Equifax, and apparently Equifax has been a little less than forthcoming over how bad it was. And it's now coming on out. The data breach was a lot larger than disclosed. So it was a bad one. It was a bad one. And better check your LifeLock if you have it there. Here's another story. This one's coming out from Great Britain, and it's basically pointing out how U.S. and British government websites are infected with crypto mining malware. That's becoming a huge problem. This is a global issue where computers are being infected with malware that does nothing but mine cryptocurrency for the criminals. And that may be one of the reasons for the cryptocurrency boom up, is there's a whole bunch of new cryptocurrency being created. Now, last week we reported on how some Russian scientists working in their nuclear facilities, their bomb factory, were caught using their supercomputer to mine cryptocurrency. And not only was this obviously misuse of the machinery, but apparently they'd hooked this computer up to the internet, which was definitely a no-no for a secure machine like that. The last word we've heard is that these scientists have all been arrested, and I think they're in serious, serious trouble. Now, if you use the popular VPN service Hotspot Shield for online anonymity and privacy, you may actually be leaking your real IP address and other sensitive information. Now, VPN means a virtual private network. And basically, it is supposed to be an invisible internet on the internet where people can't see what you and the people who've signed up for the VPN are able to see. But apparently, this service has a bug. And there's an information disclosure vulnerability discovered in Hotspot Shield that results in the exposure of user data, like the name of the Wi-Fi network name, if you're using a Wi-Fi to connect, the real IP addresses, which can reveal your location, and other information. And I would say that the state of American software development pretty much matches the state of everything else made in this country. They rush it to market without really making sure it's going to work. And part of it is that end user license agreement, where basically you cannot sue computer makers and software makers for design flaws in their product. And this goes all the way back to the very early days of the computer revolution, days like the Apple II, the Commodore VIC-20, when computers were a brand new and still fragile industry. They lobbied the U.S. government to be protected from civil litigation caused by bad products, and Congress went along with it. Well, back then it was justified. But computers today and software today are multi-billion-dollar industries. You've seen how much money there is up there in Silicon Valley. But they're still protected by that indemnification. And what that means is if you are a business owner and you buy a truck, and because of a design flaw, it crashes and you suffer financial harm, you can sue the maker of the truck to recover damages. If you buy a computerized accounting system for your business, and because of a design defect, it crashes and you lose your data and you suffer financial harm, you cannot sue the computer makers. And that's why the software companies are putting out buggy software. Nothing bad happens to them when they put out bugs. Or for that matter, when Intel puts out a chip with faulty, so-called, machinery on it. There's nothing that goes wrong. And I would really like to see Donald Trump rescind that indemnification. And we've got to return product liability to computers, to software, for that matter, to vaccines. Now, Jim Carrey is urging Facebook users to delete their accounts in protest over the Russian interference in the U.S. election. So they're back to pushing that story again, and they're trying to use Jim Carrey's star power, which has kind of faded in recent years. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials, and we will be back after these few words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And before we go back to the phones here, we've got a breaking story. Apparently, Russian fighters have been killed in a clash with U.S.-led forces in Syria. So it's on. The U.S. is provoking a war with Russia. And we're probably going to lose it, especially if it goes nuclear. And so, yeah, this is serious stuff. Also, I'm aware that for some reason the YouTube streaming has frozen. I can't get it restarted again. We're just going to have to go to the audio archives on this one. All right, let's take a phone call from Errol in the Netherlands. Aloha, Errol. Welcome back to the show. It's been a while. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hello. Nui Nui.
Yes.
Yes. It's about Minister Zijlstra. His first name is Halbe Zijlstra. And his minister, he's from the VVD in a political party.
Yes.
And he has lied. He has lied about that he has met Putin, and that Putin has said to him that Putin wants to make a greater Russia. So now you got a very complicated situation because he's the minister from Foreign Affairs.
Yes.
So, yeah, and the VVD is the ruling party in the Netherlands. So now Minister Zijlstra, so Halbe Zijlstra, he needs to lay down his function, and then another one will come in. So that's what we have here in the Netherlands. And about Syria, one thing I want to say, it's very, at this moment, you see the shifting of the politics, the how do you call it again, the unipolar world and
Yes.
the multipolar world. You see the unipolar world, what you said, now that you just said you have breaking news that Russians and Americans that have fallen some death. We need to see first what's happened. And I want to say this is the end game. So Syria is also a graveyard of empires,
Yes.
as you can see now, as Afghanistan was. So there's not just Afghanistan that's a graveyard of empires. This one, also because Russia is in there, also Iran, also Hezbollah and everything. So ISIS is now on the run. That's positive to see. They are going back, or they have nowhere to run. Turkey is now attacking the IPG. They see them as a terrorist threat. The USA, what I've read, I don't know if it's true exactly, but they have bombed 300 Kurdish forces that they have trained. And so there's so much chaos going on at this moment. So this is an end game. I see this as an end game. What do you think?
Well, I hope you're right. I'm concerned that we're seeing this massive escalation. We're seeing it from Israel. This is an escalation here. Now, according to this article, apparently these Russian soldiers were actually killed a while ago. It's just now being acknowledged and admitted to. But this is a very serious matter when you have U.S. forces killing Russian forces. And again, the neocons, they're probably out there going, yee-haw, and game is on. But yeah, we have to be very concerned. I was never worried about North Korea nuking this island because their rockets aren't that accurate and their nuclear warheads so far are very small. But if we get into a shooting war with Russia, that's a whole different ball game. And I got to tell you, I'm going to be very angry if Claire and I buy a newer car and it gets nuked the next day. I will be pissed.
Well, it would not only be your car, I think. It would be more.
Yeah, well, who cares about all those other cars? I'm concerned about my car here, you know.
Maybe you can call Kim Jong-un to fix a rocket under your car so you can fly away with it when the nukes come.
That's a good idea. I might look at that, or do the chitty chitty bang bang modifications on it.
Okay, thank you for my call. Respect. Keep on the good work.
Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Now, getting on back to computers and computer technology here. Apparently, Analysis Cable Biz, Fidelity Communications, has been forced to admit that it was behind an astroturfing campaign against a city-run fiber network. And the campaign was called Stop City-Funded Internet, and basically pretended to be a citizens activist group opposed to the city setting up its own internet as a public utility, which would be cheaper, faster, more reliable for the citizens. But obviously, Fidelity Communication doesn't want to have to compete. We'll be right back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Now's when I'm supposed to start talking here. Now, interestingly enough, Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, the lovebirds who were having an affair, well, married to other people, basically have come on out and, for all intents and purposes, admitted the media and the fact-checking sites are all biased in favor of Hillary. I know, it's a big shock. You weren't expecting to hear that. But yes, they are. All right, let's take another phone call here. Kathleen in Paris, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, hi, Michael. Aloha. A few things. First, Google really was against you because I tried. You remember last week I sent your. Yeah. Well, it was just because of that, because I tried it, and now I'm able to send to my small group the messages. So it was just because I was sending all wars are bankers' wars.
I've gotten emails from other people saying that, that's being blocked and interfered with.
Mike, a question. I wonder what you think about what's going to happen first. The banking system is going to collapse, and the financial system, or we're going to have a war. Does it seem to you like there's a race between getting a war started before the financial system collapses?
Oh, there's no question about that. I mean, I'd rather the financial system collapse and basically prevents the war from happening. But obviously, the war hawks want the war to get going, because once the war is going, if there's an economic collapse, they'll blame it on the war to save their own rear ends as to what's going on.
But how can it just keep? I mean, how can it keep going? The financial, if
well, the same way that the economy kept going during World War II, and the government will just go on borrowing money like crazy, spending it on the war, and just hope that the rest of us take care of each other. Kathleen, are you there? Oh,
did you say something? Did you say what?
I thought I'd lost your connection.
Did you say some while back that we could just have a whole new internet? We could invent a whole new internet.
Well, what I said is anybody can build an internet. It's not patented technology, and as a matter of fact, the story we were just talking about, more and more cities are building their own taxpayer-funded internet, and it's faster, cheaper, more reliable. It's being treated like a public utility. And obviously, the commercial ISPs are out there trying to find a way to stop it. And this last story we were talking about, it turned out one of these ISPs was behind what was presented as a citizens group, opposed to the idea of a city-funded internet. And you have to be very, very careful when you see these so-called citizens groups, because very often they're a front for some corporate interest. Okay?
Are you going to get a new? Do you think you can get a new car because your car was stolen?
Well, we're going to get a newer car. I mean, we don't have a lot of money, but we're definitely looking at something, obviously a little better than an 18-year-old Honda, and we're going to get a car alarm for it, and some other kind of additional locking device besides the club, which turned out not to work at all. And I've had a lot of people send in suggestions about a hidden switch, which I think is a really, really good idea. But yeah, we're in the market for a car, and we don't want to finance it in this uncertain economy, so we're just basically going to take what we saved up and just get the best car that we can for that money.
Yeah, you got $1,000. You buy $1,000 car. Yeah.
Well, we've got a little bit more than that. Here in Hawaii, you don't get much car for $1,000 anyway.
No, that was just
Well, actually, we originally paid $2,500 for the Honda. We had a friend that was leaving for a job in Iceland and needed to get rid of the car, so we had a wonderful opportunity, and it was a great car. I really liked it, and we just drove it to death, and then of course it got stolen and damaged, and at this point it's not worth anything. I think the insurance company is just going to say it's not worth trying to repair.
Well, I know, but are you going to get anything from the insurance company?
Probably not. Again, the blue book on it is close to zero because it's 18 years old. It's got 160,000 miles on it. The air conditioning doesn't work. And now, of course, it's missing major components of the engine. Okay?
You have something in common with Job.
Yes. Yeah, I think the deity made another one of those really screwed up bets with the devil. Say, yea, verily, I'm going to dump all over the Riveros, and they're still going to be nice people.
Well, you take care.
All right, thanks an awful lot. Thanks for the phone call. All righty, getting on back to the news here. As you know, we live in an era where they're starting to bring on the self-driving vehicles. They've been developed for the military for quite some time. They even showed one on the original Top Gear that I thought was very cool. But there is a company called Embark that has come up with a self-driving truck for cargo. And they just completed a test drive across the United States of America, from Los Angeles to Jacksonville, Florida, covering 2,400 miles and delivering refrigerators for Electrolux. So I imagine there's probably a lot of truck drivers out there that are getting very, very nervous right about now. So let's talk about human-caused global warming. Moscow just set an all-time record cold. Schools canceling classes for the first time in 3 generations. And they got 1 month's worth of snow in just 36 hours. Now, Chicago just got hit with their biggest snow since 2015. It is really coming on down, and we still have a couple months of winter to get through. Remember back in 1990s, early 2000s, oh, snowfall's a thing of the past. The world is warming. It's broiling. You've got to pay carbon taxes here. Let's see. Story out of Montreal. They had a major problem with snow that led to a multi-vehicle collision. 50 vehicles stranded on Highway 20 west near Mont Saint-Hilaire. Apparently 1 death and multiple injuries. 2 jackknifed trucks. Parts of southeast Queensland have recorded their lowest February temperatures ever. Now, I read a study last week. In fact, I have it here right now. It's from techtimes.com, basically saying that physicist Dan Lubin from Scripps Institute of Oceanography is basically saying the sun will be considerably dimmer by 2050. We're going into a Maunder minimum, and with it, we will get a little ice age. It's already happening. You can see it all over the place here. By the way, the Super Bowl, that was the coldest Super Bowl on record. It's also very cold over at the Olympics in Pyongyang. It's the coldest Olympics ever. Snow is so bad in Paris, they've had to close the Eiffel Tower. And I can imagine that probably there's a lot of snow built up on the tower, and it's probably putting it under a huge amount of strain. Now, the global warming people are still out there with their scare tactics. Over in the Daily Mail, they've got a story on how the thawing Arctic permafrost could release massive amounts of toxic mercury that could be harmful to human health. So we have to keep the Arctic permafrost frozen. I don't think we really need to worry about that. They're still out there with the fear-mongering, trying to get you scared. Oh, save us from the warming world, please. Take my money, take my children. Now, as you know, Taiwan has suffered 2 major quakes and a lot of aftershocks. And scientists are now saying it seems linked to an underwater volcano that erupted during the Dalton minimum 13 miles offshore. And these quakes seem to be centered on that. Now, whether this volcano is going to erupt again, and it's a very large one, or if there's an underwater landslide, they're still not sure. They're going to have to go on down and take a look at some point here. Over in Cape Town, South Africa, they are dealing with a massive water shortage. Everybody there is preparing for what they're calling day zero, when they're simply going to be out of water. There's going to be nothing in the pipes. Water levels are decreasing at a rapid rate, and they're saying they're going to be out of water in less than 3 months. Now, I have an idea. Go on down to Antarctica and grab one of those icebergs and just tow it back to South Africa. Now, yes, some of it's going to melt off, but you should get there with a large enough block where you could actually use it to get the water supply. Over in Los Angeles, apparently due to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers using glyphosate as a weed killer, it's polluted the Los Angeles River with so much glyphosate that a congressman from the area is saying it's got to stop. Now, nobody actually takes water from the Los Angeles River. It's actually a storm drain and runoff. But obviously that water winds up going down to the beach and out into the ocean, where people are going to be exposed to it. So is the sea life. They're going to be exposed to that. And that's a problem. Now, we've been talking about colony collapse disorder. There's a tremendous concern that honeybees are dying off, and everybody's pointing fingers at mites, at nicotinoid pesticides, at GMO pollen, which we know is harmful to insect species. But apparently down in Paddington in Australia, they've had a little bit of an upset where city officials basically killed off 50,000 European honeybees because one resident complained. Now, this was just this massive beehive that was in a tree, and local residents liked to watch it. It was growing, getting larger all the time. The bees didn't bother anybody. But one person complained, and the city council said that they tried to call a beekeeper and did not get a return call back immediately, at which point they called a pest control company and simply poisoned all the bees. Now, normally, and especially at a time when colony collapse disorder is an issue all around the globe, the proper thing to do would have been to wait till the beekeeper was available who could relocate the hive. And that's something that's actually done a lot for people who keep bees. I kept bees when I was a kid, till we discovered my younger brother was allergic to them. But you can relocate the hive. And all it really takes is moving the physical hive and making sure that the queen is still inside, and the rest of the bees will just follow along. But they killed off these honeybees on one single complaint. Now, this story is a little bit sick. This is over in Massachusetts, in Brockton, and apparently this mother of 5 stabbed 2 of her young sons to death and claimed it was part of a voodoo ritual that needed blood. I guess this is some of that cultural enrichment that we're all supposed to be so happy about. Up on the space station, a new first for America's Man in Space program. They've actually had a badminton game. They had this one module was large enough, and apparently on the last supply flight, somebody set up a couple of badminton rackets and some shuttlecocks, and they put up something approximating a net and just batted it back and forth. They didn't give us the final score. They just said it was done in the spirit of camaraderie, which means it was probably a tie. But it's nice that they're having fun up there. It's very little recreation on the space station. Very, very, very. Okay. Now, This happened last week. There was another very large asteroid that skimmed past the Earth, and it came within 1/5 the distance between our planet and the moon, or 39,000 miles away. Far enough to be outside the satellites in geosynchronous orbit. But boy, doesn't it seem like somebody up there is throwing rocks at us? And what's really alarming is for all the money that has been spent on this asteroid detection system, that they miss so many of them until they're literally on top of us. Remember that big one that came down over Russia a year ago? Broke all the windows, caused all the damage. Nobody even saw that coming on in. That's pretty scary stuff here. Now, the New Horizons spacecraft, that's the one that gave us the close-up view of Pluto. And it's still on its way out of the solar system. It's heading toward the Kuiper Belt, and they're hoping they're going to be able to get some images of that. But apparently, it's spun its camera around and shot a picture and sent it back to Earth, which breaks Voyager 1's record of longest distance image sent. Got to take a break for commercials. Back with the last segment of our program after these few words. Aloha America, welcome back to the show here. Last segment of our program today. And looking at some of the member posts at whatreallyhappened.com, video shows White Helmet members working under Al-Qaeda flag in Syria, which confirms the earlier reports that the White Helmets are just a PR stunt by Al-Qaeda. They're not this wonderful humanitarian group doing good. They're just out there posing for pictures and putting off propaganda. Earlier today, and I mentioned this in the first part of the show, Donald Trump Jr.'s wife was sent a package with a white powder, and they took her to the hospital just to be on the safe side. Turned out the powder was harmless, and so forth. Julian Assange has made a point that he received a similar package at the Ecuadorian embassy last week that also had white powder in it. It's very, very childish behavior here. Here's an update on the Las Vegas October 1st shooting. Apparently, the so-called autopsy report for Stephen Paddock is dated one day after he supposedly committed suicide. And something's really funny about all of that. Now, Seattle has decided they're going to remove their surveillance system. They'd put up this massive network of surveillance cameras and tracking devices, cost $150,000, and apparently the Seattle residents got very upset about that because they like their privacy as well. And Seattle has finally yielded to the will of the public, and they're taking it down. And here's the story I can identify with. Grand Theft Auto Chicago. Carjacking surge to decade highs. Which, yeah, going to be on top for that one here. Here's another good one. Apparently, Secretary of Defense Mattis is admitting there is no evidence that Assad has used sarin gas on the Syrian people. Where are they getting this stuff from? Miss Cleo? The Ouija board? The crystal ball never lies, or the magic 8 ball. It's amazing here. Over in Germany, a German court has ruled Facebook is breaching data protection rules with privacy settings that overshare by default and by requiring its users to give their real names. See, over in Germany, they respect your privacy and your right to be anonymous. We already talked about the Equifax breach here. Now, a lot of people are making a big talk about Obama's and Michelle's new presidential portraits. And there's been a lot of complaint that Michelle's doesn't even really look like her, But there's another big stink about this because the artist, Kehinde Wiley, has done paintings showing black people beheading white people. Not exactly the best recommendation for somebody to do a presidential portrait, but he got the job anyway. There's the music. Time for me to get on out of here and get something useful done for the rest of the week. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Meanwhile, stay tuned for John Stadmiller. I'm sure he's got all kinds of wonderful things to share with you. And we'll talk to you tomorrow. Aloha, America.